Colorado adds a transfer. Does that make them a Big 12 title contender or a looming quarterback problem?
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source. This show is to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. This episode brought to you by the College Football Playoff. It's here. You don't want to miss a moment of the action. The College Football Playoff, presented by Allstate, begins with 4 first-round games December 20th and 21st on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. We'll talk about one of those games later. Is Penn State about to roll SMU? They could. And Jake Dickert leaves Washington State for Wake Forest. Plenty of thoughts there. But first, that's Kevin Borba of Locked On Buffs. And the Big 12 did not disappoint in its excitement of a conference championship race this year. I hyped it up coming into the year, lived up to my expectations, maybe even surpassed them, Kevin. And Colorado was squarely in that mix. But they've added Kaidon Salter from Liberty at quarterback. I have major questions here. I see how this can work out, but my questions and doubts are twofold. Number one, Kaidon Salter regressed playing in Conference USA from 2023 to 2024 with the same offensive-minded head coach. And number two, with JuJu Lewis coming in, I thought Colorado would just let him start and say, you know what, we can be good this year, but we don't need to try necessarily be great, and we can let JuJu learn on the job because you now introduce a greater possibility than before that you could lose the quarterback of the future if he becomes disgruntled with a lack of playing time.
Yeah, I think the touch on the regression part, I think it's important to note he lost his top receiver to LSU from the year prior. He was a 2023 Conference USA MVP, so we know what's in there. Now, obviously, you don't want to see him take a step back, but obviously, Liberty, it's a weird scenario there where I don't want to say they kind of lost momentum after they lost games and were out of the playoff, but I feel like that could be the case. In terms of the Julian Lewis thing, it is a little bit dicey, right? You don't want your 5-star quarterback who you kind of made it seem like was your world come into town and be like, okay, you're off to the side now. But you also don't want your 5-star quarterback's confidence to be absolutely shot if he's not ready to play. And we've seen 5-star quarterbacks around the country play and not be ready, and we've also seen some rare exceptions. I would like to point out guys like Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning. None of them played right away, right? They all sat. Trevor Lawrence did play his freshman year, but he did not start right away. It was Kelly Bryant's team for a little bit. So I don't know if it's the worst thing to bring in an experienced quarterback to sort of get things going, because best case scenario, Kaidon Salter leads you to Big 12 title contention, and worst case scenario, he kind of isn't what you hoped, and you give Julian Lewis an opportunity.
Yeah, I see the handoff part of it. But here's the thing. Once Salter steps into that role, and you don't bring in a guy who's going on his 4th year of starting, no matter where he has been, a guy like that expects to start.
Right.
And I bet Colorado expects to start. The moment he struggles, chirp, 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 chirp. Play JuJu. Put JuJu in there. Hey, why isn't JuJu play? Hey, JuJu could do that. Hey, JuJu could do that. There are just times where you need to recognize I see the upside of a veteran starter here, but I think back to Oregon in 2016. They brought in Dakota Prukop, who was a veteran quarterback from a lower level of competition. He came over from Montana State, and guess what? He wasn't necessarily terrible. But the coaching staff needed to recognize, this isn't going to be a conference championship team, and we should just start the young guy, Justin Herbert, let him get experience, which is what ended up happening after everything went completely off the rails.
What happened to that Justin Herbert guy? Is he good? Any good?
Yeah, he's worked out. He's pretty good. But I'm saying, right, if you asked Oregon fans to go back in time, they'd say, Herbert should have just started from the get-go. It would have been better for Oregon. It would have been better for Herbert even as well. You look at Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, for instance. Should they have brought in a veteran? Maybe they win 7 or 8 games this year, but what's the value in that compared to getting the maximum development for the guy who needs to be the future of the program at quarterback?
Yeah, I think that's the fine line that they're walking a tightrope right now, to quote an iconic movie, The Greatest Showman. A little theater there for you. But realistically, you have to understand especially for Colorado and Deion Sanders, they're in no position to be in rebuilding mode, right? If Deion Sanders has a losing season, it's magnified times 100. So you need a quarterback that can win right now, and they don't know who that is. That being said, you have to throw in a guy who's going to make the plays. And right now, we don't know what Julian Lewis is. We at least know what Kaidon Salter's ceiling is. Also, we talked about this on my show yesterday. Colorado's offensive line, Spencer, not always great. Shedeur Sanders was the third most sacked quarterback in the country, which was an improvement because the year before he was the second most sacked quarterback in the country. That's called improvement. Look it up. But realistically, Kaidon Salter can move with his legs, right? He's seen what these college defenses are going to do. He's experienced. He's kind of old. Shout out to the transfer portal era. All these guys are like 25, 26 these days, it feels like.
He is a more traditional fifth year, though. He redshirted his first year. He played for 3, and now he's getting a fifth elsewhere. Like, that's at least standard.
It is true. The COVID years scarred me. I still am like,
I know. I have the same thing where I'm like, oh well, what if he's got a COVID year?
Yeah, I'm like, does this guy have a 9th year of eligibility I don't know about? Possibly. But no, Kaidon Salter is mobile, and I think his mobility is his biggest key to staying on the field and getting on the field for Colorado. Because if he can make plays with his legs, it opens up the run game. It opens up the RPO, which Colorado has not had, and it sort of gives him an edge over Julian Lewis, right? I think that's what you need if you're going quarterback to quarterback battle, right? Julian Lewis isn't as mobile. He's not known for running as much as Kaidon Salter is. And so if you're Kaidon Salter, you play into that, right? And if you're Colorado, Pat Shurmur, you start drawing up quarterback design runs. That changes the offensive dynamic to a complete T because you're also losing, and I'm sure they'll replace him in the portal, your top 4 receivers. So there's a lot of changes going on.
I see that angle of it. That makes a little bit more sense. They open with Georgia Tech in 2025. So on the one hand, do you want to throw a guy into the fire like that? Maybe not ideally, but
well, let's go this way. How many games do you give Kaidon Salter before you pull him? Or how many games? Who has the longer leash? Like say Julian Lewis starts. And how
if
many
you go through the non-conference slate and you're under 500, then that's got to be an immediate pull.
For both? Because if it's Julian Lewis, and this is the hard part about having a 5-star quarterback, if you bench him, and I think we talked about this on my show, Dante Moore, UCLA, right? If you bench them, they are probably going to leave. So why would you not just go with the vet, let him ride it out? If he does well, great. If he doesn't, you have the 5-star waiting. Because that's a risky game to play. I don't envy the decisions here.
Yeah, I agree. I see that. I do. At the start of the segment, I was definitely on the anti adding this sort of transfer train, and I see how that could work out. Mm-hmm. I still think that's a missed opportunity to get him the most experience possible.
Yeah.
Because what if Salter shows you through the first 5 games they're sitting there at 3-2, but he's kind of hanging on and it's barely. But they're 3-2, and they've only got one. Let's say they lose the Georgia Tech game, but then only have one conference loss. Well, you're not going to pull the guy. But if you start to see signs of this isn't really going to work, because Kaidon Salter in his 3 years starting, he's only hit 60% completion once. Kevin, like I would be far more open to this idea for Colorado of, hey, let's bring in a veteran and allow Colorado to be at their very best in 2025 and win the most games they could. If it was someone who I felt was going to translate better to the Power 4 ranks, I don't know that Salter is that sort of guy. He took a step back, and he's never had super high completion percentage in his 3 years as a starter. I don't know why that suddenly goes up coming to Colorado that's working in a new receiving core. There's so much new for Colorado next year. I think they should just embrace it.
Yeah, I think the one thing about the receiving core, though, is Coach Prime's going to get guys. We don't know who they are yet. Like Jonte Cook, the former Texas 5-star, he put the little, thing on his story after it happened. So maybe Colorado gets him. They're going to get guys at the receiving core. Plus, they return Omarion Miller and Draylon Miller as well. So they're going to have guys for him to throw to. I think the biggest challenge for Salter, and I think this will be Shurmur's responsibility, is hitting the open throws and getting him throws he can hit, right? I think the one thing about Salter, and you could compare him to the quarterbacks of Jamie Chadwell's past, Malik Willis, Grayson McCall, he's obviously not as gifted as a passer of those two, right? So if you're Pat Shurmur, you know his limitations, and you go, okay, this isn't Shedeur, right? He's not going to be launching 50-yard balls through tight windows, throwing it up to Travis Hunter. That's not who this is. And so we're going to see how good of a schematics person Pat Shurmur is. I think this is more so on him to figure it out. Also, I wanted to go back to their first 5 games because I think that's a little threshold we gave. Georgia Tech at home, Delaware, the Blue Hens at home, Wyoming at home, Arizona at home, then Arizona State also at home. That's how their schedule is listed. I'm sure those aren't the dates, but those are the first 5 games on Colorado's schedule. If Kaidon Salter is not able to escape that at least 4-1, I think you got to pull him, right? If it's Julian Lewis right away, you have to.
I don't know that their order has been set. The non-conference is.
I'm saying like the first 5 games. We'll just say that's what it is for now. If that's how it looks, and you're 3-2, right? With Kaidon Salter, is that what your goals were? Right, your goals are to compete for a Big 12 title. If Kaidon Salter can't do that right away, I think you pull him. I think you use him as a wildcat quarterback and just go from there. If it's Julian Lewis, I think you have to give Julian, if he's a starter from day one, you have to give him at least half the season. Like that's just how it is.
Yeah, I think so, which is why I question, but we'll see how it goes. Kevin Borber, Locked On Buffs, appreciate it as always. Oh, we got to get to Penn State though, because are they about to just roll SMU? I kind of think so. That's coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by the College Football Playoff. It's that time of year. The College Football Playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st. That's Saturday, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, SMU battling Penn State at noon Eastern. About to talk about that game more in just a moment. I think Penn State is favored, and with good reason. The Clemson Tigers then look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Is Penn State going to be the first round blowout game in the College Football Playoff? That's Zach Seyko, Locked On Nittany Lions here, joining me to discuss. Here's where I get that sentiment from, Zach. You're not going to have easy conditions to throw the football. And I've seen Penn State throw the ball. Tyler Warren's really good. The running backs got involved against Oregon. They went up and down the field. But they ran for 290 yards in that game against an Oregon defense that's really good. Against a front four that's really good. SMU has not run for 200 yards in over a month. The only legitimate opponent they've really done it against this year was Duke. And I just look at this game and say, boy, you might need a run game to move the football if you can't throw it. That doesn't cater to what SMU does. I liked the way Penn State played in the Big Ten championship game. I think the Nittany Lions win this game big.
Yeah, you should be somewhat of a Penn State expert at this point since you saw them play, or since you saw Oregon and Penn State play in the Big Ten championship in person. I mean, look, I can't say that I was overly surprised, but it somewhat caught me off guard that Penn State was going to have that kind of success against Oregon. You and I talked about it, how the battle at the line of scrimmage was going to play out, and it doesn't get any easier with SMU. SMU has a top 3 run defense, but the difference is the fact that, okay, the offense forces teams to play to their style, and Penn State is a team that can win in a bunch of different ways. They can go fast. They can go slow. They can sustain the 12, 15 play drives that are going to be necessary in this game. You have to put ice on, literally and figuratively, on the SMU game plan, because when that offense gets going, they're going to be humming, they're going to be in a rhythm. That's when they're tough to stop, because then in a blink of an eye, oh wow, they scored. But SMU's biggest enemy is SMU. They turn the football over a little too much. They can make mistakes when Kevin Jennings, particularly as a first-year starter, gets flustered. And if the offense isn't able to get into rhythm, and Penn State will do what it is necessary in addition to the elements. SMU is playing in a game where the temperatures are going to have a real feel of 15 degrees, Spencer. It was 70 just a couple of days ago in Dallas, Texas. I don't know how you prepare for that unless you fly over to Pennsylvania and practice outside in the elements like Penn State can do this entire season. So you're also going to have 100,000 plus fans yelling against you, right? So it's the combination of crowd noise, wind, the actual weather, we're going to get maybe some snow showers up here in central PA, but don't forget about the snow. Talk about the wind. Talk about the absolute cold, because the first time Kevin Jennings gets laid out by Abdul Carter, that's going to sting for probably a few more drives.
Yeah, I think that's another reason. I mean, Penn State having an outright home game here is another reason I'm confident in the Nittany Lions. And look, let's be honest about it. This is not Ohio State. This is not Peak Michigan. This is not Oregon. Yeah. These are the games that Penn State wins. And this year, since the early portion when they struggled with Bowling Green inexplicably, they've rolled everybody except Minnesota. But that was on the road. This is at home. I struggle seeing SMU. I think they can hang around in the game. I don't think Penn State goes up 21-3 and then the game is just never tight. But I look at that 8.5 number according to our friends at FanDuel, Zach. I think Penn State covers that. And yes, SMU's run defense has been really good, but I am 100%. You can put me down. You can roast me in the comments, do whatever you would like in the camp of SMU has not beaten a team as good as Penn State this year. It doesn't mean I don't think SMU should be in the playoff. I think they should. I said that at the time. I wanted them in at 11-2 over a 9-3 Alabama or a 9-3 Ole Miss. This is just not a great matchup for them. Heck, I might even like Texas. I think I would like Texas far more as a matchup for SMU than Penn State in this spot. But Penn State's a really good football team. And I think the level of talent in the trenches going both ways with the way that offensive line played against Oregon, if they do that again, you've got Andy Kotelnicki, who's going to have had 2 weeks to prepare. Now, Rhett Lashley and the SMU offensive staff, they've been really good this year as well. But they've got to travel, and that's just more time for Kotelnicki and company to be comfortable at home, get ready. I think that offense is going to be ready to go. I think they're going to be able to run the football more than anyone has on SMU this year. And I think the number of areas that worry me for SMU in this game are far more than the ones that excite me for the Mustangs.
Well, and I'm glad you pointed out the fact that, okay, SMU hasn't beaten anybody that's the caliber of Penn State. SMU hasn't even played anybody. They haven't even lost to anybody that's the caliber of Penn State. Penn State,
I think Clemson is close.
I mean, Clemson's in the playoff, don't get me wrong, but remember, they had 3 losses. The only reason they were in here is because of a few tiebreakers. They got into the ACC
12-team playoff. Sorry, coughed.
I mean, I can't wait for the 16 or even the 24-team playoff, but that's a different
64-team field, baby. Bring it on. 5-game regular season. Let's go. Let's go.
I mean, we could have a podcast on that in itself, but Penn State, they played Ohio State close. They played Oregon close. Those were 2 one-score games, and the teams that SMU ultimately lost to BYU early in the season, so maybe I'm not going to hold them to it as much, but everyone wants to talk about Penn State's weak level of competition within the Big Ten. Let's not neglect the fact that somehow SMU beat Duke by 1 point when they committed 6 turnovers, and I watched that entire game to figure out how did Manny Diaz do it, because he was the former defensive coordinator at Penn State, so that had a lot of my intrigue, and SMU should have had more. The fact that they didn't turn the ball over 8 times, 9 times is beyond me. So now you factor in weather, noise, travel, and a Penn State team that's just the best talented team that you're going to face. I think the key here is, you mentioned Andy Kotelnicki. It's Tom Allen. Kevin Jennings is a one-read quarterback. And even if it was Preston Stone, this is a one-read offense. Tom Allen's going to be able to scheme that up so easily, take away Kevin Jennings' first 2 reads, and this offense goes nowhere.
Can we talk about this game being dubbed the battle of backup-less quarterback teams? Because
Stone's still is still on the roster. Bo Pribula entered the portal, but
I thought Stone was in the portal.
He's in the portal, but he's on the team.
Okay.
It's just Penn State.
All right. Well, point stands that both backups of this team. I mean, that's an advantage SMU. If someone gets dinged up in the cold weather, the quarterback position.
Don't talk about it. Don't mention it too loud.
Yeah. Penn State just has to hope that it doesn't get to that particular spot. Let's wrap here with our score prediction, Zach. I think Penn State wins. I don't know how many points get scored in this game, because that 45-37 shootout in the Big Ten title game was at Lucas Oil Stadium. That's an indoor environment. Even though Penn State is comfortable in the cold, they've played there many times before, of course. I still think you see somewhat more of a slugfest. I don't expect it to be 31-24 at the half. I remember seeing that score, Zach, and texting you at the game going, what's going on here? What are we doing? Like, how did this happen? I don't think that happens here. I think Penn State wins. I think Penn State covers. I'll go 31-20. And I think that they build an early lead of 7 to 10 points, and they just kind of keep SMU at an arm's length throughout the game.
Yeah, I feel like that's where it's going to be. I think Penn State wins 35-21. SMU, because of that tempo, because of that pace, will never truly be out of it, as we saw against Clemson. But that's the difference in North Carolina, in Charlotte, versus 15-degree weather. Everyone's, it's James Franklin and Penn State. It's still, I would argue that they have more experience. They're just better suited for this environment. Kevin Jennings is a first-year starter in this kind of road environment in the middle of December. Just does not set up nicely. And like I said, they can hit the home run, but they're gonna strike out a lot when the deck is stacked against them. So I think SMU will definitely continue to push the pace and try to be involved, but they just won't be able to finish. They won't be able to convert. That's going to be the difference. They might get close, but they're not going to be able to score that touchdown where they got back within against Clemson.
That's Zach Seyko, Locked On Nittany Lions. Great stuff as always, but not as great stuff happening in Pullman right now. Washington State has lost, just about everybody. What to make of Jake Dickert to Wake Forest, and what comes next for the Cougs? That's next. First, a reminder, this episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app, it's got everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. They've got you covered. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com, that's the place to go. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more, not less more, with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Once you check them out, go see my friends at Prize Picks. So, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. And join now, because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. Do you want to miss Picksmas? No, you don't want to miss Christmas or Picksmas, so make sure you check them out. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks app, download the code LOCKEDONCollege. Put in the code to the app that you download, I should say, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. There is no way to put a positive spin on what is happening in Pullman, or Corvallis for that matter. Both schools, Washington State and Oregon State, have now been burned by guys who felt like they were 10 toes down. They're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. And then they leave. Why? Because the landscape of college football has left the Pac-12 behind. And yes, there are still 2 schools there. And yes, they're adding more in 2026. But they can't compete financially with what the Power 4 schools have to offer. That's what this is all coming down to. Jake Dickert leaves Washington State, which for their bowl game, the Holiday Bowl, good bowl game, by the way, Washington State is without a head coach, offense coordinator, defensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, running backs coach, starting quarterback, and 22 players have hit the portal. I don't even know how to find a precedent for what is going on right now, because there isn't one. Not to this degree, at least not in my lifetime. Haven't seen it. So this is what the relegation feels like. And Washington State came into this year ahead of Oregon State. The Bees actually beat them head-to-head in Corvallis, but Washington State had a much better season. They were ranked in the top 25, picked up a couple of really good Power 4 wins, and Jake Dickert has talked about wanting to coach for 10 more years and then step away from coaching because he wants to, be able to go to his kids' high school sporting events and whatnot. I think his kids are a little bit younger right now. But Dickert was the interim head coach at Washington State when the Nick Rolovich situation happened. Then he was the full-time head coach, and he's been all about the Cougs and all about the Cougs. And it just goes to show you, no matter what your head coach says, no matter what you choose to believe, he will flip if the right offer comes along. And he feels like Wake Forest is the right offer for him, probably because they can offer significantly more money. They've got more resources. It doesn't mean he goes to Wake Forest and elevates them to the top of the conference right away. I think that's a job that can take a couple of years. We've seen Wake Forest be good before. Never seen them be great consistently. But just the fact that he's willing to take that job, which by any metric has a tougher path to the college football playoff than Washington State, is representative of how much this is a kick in the gut, again, for those fans up in Pullman. There is no positive angle. There is no bright side. There is no, well, at least there's that. No, there's nothing. There's nothing to glam onto. Any good player you have, he's going in the transfer portal. Their leading tackler, defensively, portal. Top offensive lineman, he's not there. Quarterback who replaced a previous star quarterback that transferred to an ACC school because he was able to get more money. Yeah, that guy's not sticking around either. So this has just been a delayed version of what happened at Oregon State. It's taking place at Washington State right now in real time. And I think it stinks. I think it absolutely stinks. These are programs that had promising coaches, that had strong programs, upward trajectories, and then the rug got pulled out from underneath them. And there was nothing they could have done. If there was, they would have done it. By the way, this is the same Washington State athletic department whose athletic director went to, drumroll please, Washington, their bitter arch rival. So, what do you have to feel good about if you're a Washington State football fan right now? That the Cougs brand is still there, that alumni have been around, guys like Ryan Leaf and some other Cougar greats, I believe, have made or were a part of making the pitch to John Mateer to try to help keep him in Pullman. They pulled together a bunch of money, and when that failed, Jake Dickert, I think, said, you know what, I can't keep my best players here, and I need a place where I can at least be more competitive. And so he goes and he port in a storm and replaces Coach Clausen at Wake Forest. So for Washington State, now the question becomes, naturally, who do you go get? Surprisingly, the list of candidates is actually pretty solid. I'll throw a couple names at you that would make sense at the very least. In no particular order, Jim Mora is really interesting. He knows the West Coast, was the head coach at UCLA, had plenty of success there. He is currently where? UConn. Not just being a super fan for the basketball team. He's their head football coach. They've got no tradition. They've got no conference. They've got nothing. He's winning games. He's going to bowl games over there at UConn. So at the very least, that's a guy who is winning at a place where you don't have superior resources for your football program. And in fact, you probably have inferior resources. Now, do they play an incredibly tough schedule? No, they don't. But the selling point for a guy like Jim Mora is, hey, you could come back to the West Coast and you can be at a program where, look, Washington State was 8-1. They were a real candidate to make the college football playoff. If they had won their final 3 games, the defense fell apart. That's why they moved on from the defensive coordinator. And by the way, the timing of this thing completely stinks, which I'll touch on with a next potential candidate who still could be a candidate in just a moment. But if you hadn't done that, Washington State at 11-1 with a blowout win at home against Texas Tech, a neutral site win against Washington, and their only loss being on the road against Boise State, they would have gotten a look. They would have been in the conversation. So at the very least, the path to the playoff, not just for 2025, but for 2026 and beyond, once the Pac-12 gets itself back up to 8 teams, that's going to be a strong selling point for any coaching candidate that wants to go and take the Washington State job, which certainly doesn't feel very appealing. So the timing of this stinks because Jake Dickert removed the defensive coordinator because he wasn't coaching a side of the ball that was very productive this season. Well, that sort of move then they lost their offensive coordinator, then they lost the quarterback and such. But when you remove just the defensive coordinator, but you stay there as a head coach, you're signaling that, hey, I'm going to be here. We just need to find the right defensive coordinator and we can make this right. Instead, Dickert leaves now after they make the big pitch to John Mateer. And the timing of this makes me think that Dickert was waiting to see, are we able to keep Mateer? If not, I'm not going to try with our inferior resources to go and try and keep good players every year. I need a place where I can just, have a more stable roster situation year in and year out. If they hadn't done that, Jason Eck, who was hired to be the head coach in New Mexico, would have been a candidate here. Because where was he coaching? Idaho. Where's Idaho? It's in Moscow, Idaho. That's not far from Pullman. It's driving distance. Might be shouting distance. They're so close together. So doesn't mean there aren't other good candidates out there. Brian Harsin was just hired to be the offensive coordinator at Cal. There's a guy who was at Boise State. Now, they have great resources compared to their Mountain West peers, but that guy has a strong connection to West Coast football going back for quite a while, and he has a track record of winning. You might say, well, he was just hired to be the offensive coordinator. Jason Eck was just hired to be the head coach in New Mexico. I don't think a head coach is going back on an offer like Eck at New Mexico, though I won't rule out anything in today's world. An offensive coordinator, though, we see this all the time. Bill O'Brien did it at Ohio State last year. Cliff Kingsbury did it to USC once upon a time. Guys will forego an opportunity to be an offensive coordinator that they've agreed to if a head coaching opportunity comes along. So I think those are a couple of names to put out there. There's the head coach at Montana State as well. That could be a name that you see. He's got his team in the FCS semifinals at the moment. But what Jake Dickert has clearly shown is he doesn't feel. I think he did really like Pullman and want to make it work, but it just doesn't work in today's college football. At least not the way that it can elsewhere. I think he became really frustrated with that. So whatever coach takes this job has to be willing to accept the limitations financially that you're going to have against every other program, against power conferences in all of college football. It is really challenging. This stinks for Cougs fans. It really, really stinks. That's just the world that we've created. I hope you're happy, college football power brokers. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.